The first thing we noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind you hear deep in the wilderness, but the kind that feels like the world itself is holding its breath. Then the ground beneath our feet started breathing.
Welcome to Horror Audiobook.
There are places in this world that humans were never meant to explore. Vast forests where maps fail, compasses spin, and entire groups of hikers vanish without explanation. Tonight's story begins like many others, a group of friends seeking adventure in one of the largest untouched forests in the country. But what they discover deep among the ancient trees isn't just wilderness. Because beneath those roots, something is alive. Something old. Something enormous. And something that wakes up when humans wander too far. This is the story of the night the forest itself started breathing. Chapter 1. They thought it was just another hiking trip. The highway stretched endlessly through the countryside, a thin ribbon of asphalt cutting through miles of dense wilderness. On either side of the road, the forest loomed tall and ancient, its towering trees forming a wall of shadow that swallowed the afternoon sun. Inside the dusty SUV, 5 hikers laughed over the hum of the engine. To them, this trip was simple. Just another weekend adventure. Just another forest. Just another trail. None of them had any idea what waited beneath the roots. Marcus Hale drove with one hand on the wheel, his other resting casually on the window frame. He was the unofficial leader of the group, the one who planned the routes, checked the gear, and convinced everyone that getting lost in the wilderness was somehow relaxing. Beside him sat Alina, quietly reviewing a folded topographic map spread across her knees. In the back seat were Tyler and Jess, arguing about which trail would have the best view at sunrise. And squeezed behind the backpacks in the cargo area sat Owen, the quietest member of the group, watching the forest roll by through the rear window. They had all hiked together before. Rocky mountains, desert canyons, rain-soaked valleys. Experienced. Prepared. Confident. That confidence would become their first mistake. The forest appeared on the map as Black Hollow National Forest. Nearly 3 million acres of wilderness. Miles of trails. Hundreds of miles where there were no trails at all. Marcus had discovered the location while browsing obscure hiking forums. A handful of users had mentioned the forest's untouched beauty, old-growth trees, hidden lakes, and valleys that few people had ever documented. But there were other comments too. Stranger ones. Stories about missing hikers. Trails that seemed to change. Campers hearing strange sounds beneath the ground at night. Marcus had dismissed those posts instantly. Every remote wilderness had stories like that. People loved myths. They loved spooky legends, especially about forests. And Marcus loved proving those legends wrong. The SUV finally slowed as they approached a small roadside gas station. It looked like it had been there for decades. Faded paint, rusty pumps, and a wooden sign hanging crookedly above the door. There were no other cars. No houses nearby. Just forest. Miles and miles of forest. Marcus pulled in. "Last stop before the trailhead," he said. Tyler stretched his arms dramatically. "Civilization ends here." Jess grinned, "Dramatic much." "Hey," Tyler replied, "I'm just saying, this is where horror movies usually start." Owen chuckled softly from the back. But Alina didn't laugh. She was staring at the forest beyond the gas station. The trees looked older here. Thicker. Darker. And strangely still. Inside the station, a bell jingled softly as Marcus pushed open the door. The interior smelled faintly of gasoline and old wood. Behind the counter stood a thin, elderly man with gray hair and tired eyes. He watched them enter without smiling, Afternoon, Marcus said casually. The man nodded slowly. You folks passing through? Heading into Black Hollow, Marcus replied. The reaction was subtle, but it was there. The old man's shoulders stiffened. For a moment, the station seemed quieter than before. Camping, the man asked. 3-day hike, Alina said. Northern trails. The old man stared at them for a long moment. Then he looked past them, out the window, toward the forest. His voice lowered. You should reconsider. Jess raised an eyebrow. Why? The man rubbed his hands together slowly. That forest, it ain't right. Tyler smirked slightly. What do you mean? The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward on the counter. You ever been in a forest where everything goes quiet? Marcus shrugged. Sure, happens sometimes. The man shook his head. No, he said quietly. Not like this. The room felt colder somehow. Outside, the wind rustled faintly through the trees. Then the man said the words that would follow them for the rest of the trip. If the forest goes quiet. He paused. His eyes met Marcus. Leave immediately. Silence lingered for a moment. Then Tyler laughed. All right, that's definitely the opening line of a horror movie. Jess chuckled. Do we get haunted cabins too? Marcus smiled politely. I think we'll survive. But the old man didn't smile back. He simply watched them. The way someone watches people who are already too far gone. 15 minutes later, they were back on the road. The forest grew thicker with every mile. The road narrowed. Cell service disappeared. And the sunlight slowly dimmed beneath the canopy overhead. Creepy old guy, Tyler said. Just trying to scare tourists, Jess replied. Marcus nodded. Every town near a forest has someone like that. Owen spoke for the first time in a while. Still, they all glanced back at him. What? Marcus asked. Owen shrugged. That silence thing. Jess laughed. Relax. But Owen didn't respond. He was staring out the window again. At the forest. The trees seemed impossibly tall now. Ancient trunks disappearing into shadows far above. And for some reason, they looked closer to the road than before. The SUV finally stopped at a narrow dirt clearing. A weathered wooden sign marked the trailhead. Black Hollow National Forest. Below it, carved crudely into the wood, someone had scratched another message. It wasn't official. It looked like it had been done with a knife. 4 simple words. Marcus leaned closer to read it. Don't geo too far. Tyler whistled. Well, that's welcoming. Jess rolled her eyes. Probably teenagers. Marcus shrugged. All right, gear up. Backpacks were lifted. Boots tightened. Maps unfolded. The hikers stepped onto the narrow trail. The forest swallowed them almost immediately. Branches arched overhead. Shadows stretched across the ground. And the deeper they walked, the darker the woods became. For the first hour, everything felt normal. The trail wound through towering pines and thick undergrowth. Sunlight filtered softly through the canopy. Birds chirped somewhere above. Tyler pointed out animal tracks in the dirt. Jess photographed strange mushrooms growing along fallen logs. Marcus checked the compass occasionally. Elena studied the map. Owen walked slightly behind the others. Quiet. Watching. Listening. Something about the forest felt strange, but he couldn't explain why. Another hour passed. The trail narrowed. The trees grew older. Thicker. The forest floor was tangled, with enormous roots twisting through the soil like buried veins. Then Alina slowed her pace. Marcus. He turned. What? She glanced down at the map, then around at the forest. We should have reached the ridge by now. Marcus frowned. That's not possible. He checked the compass. Still pointing north. Still steady. But when he looked ahead, the trail kept going. Endlessly. Through trees that looked exactly the same. Tyler laughed. Maybe the map's old. Alina didn't laugh. She looked around again. Uneasy. We should have reached the ridge. The wind rustled softly through the branches overhead. Birds chirped somewhere in the distance. But Owen had stopped walking. Marcus noticed. You good? Owen nodded slowly. Yeah. But his voice was uncertain. He tilted his head slightly. Listening. Marcus followed his gaze. What is it? Owen hesitated. Then said quietly. Does the forest sound? He paused. The others waited. Then he finished the sentence. Too quiet. Marcus listened. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Birds. Wind. Leaves. Just forest sounds. He shook his head. You're imagining things. Owen forced a small smile. Yeah. Maybe he was. They kept walking. Deeper into Black Hollow. And somewhere far below the soil, something ancient shifted slowly beneath the roots. But the hikers couldn't feel it. Not yet. Not until the forest decided to breathe. Chapter 2. The map stopped making sense. The deeper the hikers moved into Black Hollow, the older the forest seemed to become. At first, the difference was subtle. The trees grew taller, the trunks thicker, moss clung to everything like a damp green skin. But after another hour of walking, even Marcus began to notice something strange. The forest felt wrong. Not dangerous. Not yet. Just wrong in a way that was difficult to explain. The trail they followed had been clearly marked on Alina's map. A narrow route cutting through the northern section of the forest before reaching a ridge overlooking a hidden valley. Simple. Straightforward. A hike they should have completed before sunset. But the ridge never appeared. Instead, the trail stretched endlessly ahead. Marcus stopped walking and wiped sweat from his forehead. That's weird. Alina unfolded the map again. We should have crossed the ridge almost 40 minutes ago. Tyler glanced around at the forest. All I see are trees. Jess leaned against a massive pine. How far off could we be? Marcus checked the compass clip to his backpack. The needle pointed north. Exactly where it should. That's the strange part, he said quietly. We're going the right direction. They pushed forward again. The forest grew denser. Branches knitted together above them, blocking much of the sunlight. Shadows gathered between the trees like dark water pooling on the ground. Owen walked silently near the back of the group, his eyes scanning the forest floor. Something about the place made his skin crawl. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. More like the sensation of walking through someone else's house without permission. Like the forest knew they were there. And didn't like it. Another half hour passed. Still no ridge. Alina stopped again. This isn't possible. Marcus stepped beside her. She pointed at the map. We should be here. Her finger rested on a thin line marking a steep slope. But look around. Marcus did. The ground around them was completely flat. No slope. No ridge. No valley. Just endless forest. Tyler crouched near a fallen log and studied the dirt. Maybe we veered off the trail earlier. Marcus shook his head. We haven't crossed any forks. Jess frowned. So what, the map's wrong? Alina didn't answer immediately. She turned slowly, scanning the forest in every direction. Then she said something that made Marcus uneasy. I don't recognize any of this terrain. Marcus unfolded his GPS device. The small screen flickered to life. For a moment, it worked normally. Coordinates appeared. Trail lines. Then the screen glitched. The map distorted. Pixelated. And suddenly, the location marker began drifting across the screen like it was floating on water. Marcus frowned. That's not good. Tyler stood. What happened? Signal interference, maybe. Marcus tapped the screen. The GPS marker suddenly jumped several miles to the west, then disappeared entirely. The screen went blank. Jess laughed nervously. Well, that's comforting. Marcus shoved the device back into his pocket. Old tech happens sometimes. But his voice lacked confidence. The forest seemed quieter now. Not silent, but quieter than before. Owen noticed it first. The birds had stopped singing. He hadn't realized how loud they had been until the sound vanished. Now there was only the faint whisper of wind through the branches. Nothing else. No insects. No rustling animals. Just wind. He cleared his throat. Hey, guys. The group turned. Notice anything? Tyler shrugged. What? Owen gestured around them. It's quiet. Jess rolled her eyes. We're in the woods. No, Owen said. Too quiet. Marcus listened for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, yeah. It was strange. But forests did that sometimes. Animals moved. Birds flew elsewhere. It didn't mean anything. Probably. They kept walking. Minutes stretched into another hour. The forest remained the same in every direction. Towering trees, thick roots, heavy moss, and that endless trail winding deeper between them. Then Marcus stopped again. Hold up. Everyone froze. He pointed at something on the ground. Footprints. Fresh. Tyler squinted. Those hours. Marcus knelt, examining them carefully. Boot prints. 5 sets. They're boot prints. Tyler laughed. Okay, that's weird. Jess looked around slowly. But we've been walking straight. Marcus stood. We must have circled. Alina shook her head. That's impossible. Why? Because look. She pointed ahead. The trail continued forward. Unbroken. No intersection. No loop. Just the same narrow path disappearing between the trees. Tyler scratched his head. So how the hell did we end up back here? No one answered. The wind shifted slightly. The branches creaked softly overhead. Marcus forced a confident smile. All right, no big deal. He pointed north. We just keep going. Alina hesitated. But she nodded. What else could they do? Going back would only confuse things more. So they moved forward again. The light began fading sooner than expected. Sunset still hours away, yet the forest floor darkened as if the trees themselves were swallowing the daylight. Long shadows stretched between the trunks. Jess turned on her flashlight. That's not normal. Marcus checked his watch. Cloud cover maybe. But when he looked up, the sky above the canopy was clear. Blue. Bright. And yet down below, the forest continued growing darker. They reached a clearing shortly after. A small open space surrounded by enormous trees. Marcus dropped his backpack. Camp here tonight. Tyler nodded. Probably smart. Jess sat on a fallen log. Tomorrow we figure out where the hell we are. Alina studied the map again. But her expression had changed. Confused. Uneasy. Almost frightened. Marcus noticed. What? She hesitated, then slowly turned the map around so he could see it. Look at the trail. Marcus did. For a moment, he didn't understand what she meant. Then his stomach tightened. The trail line on the map ended miles ago. According to the map, they had already passed the end of the marked trail. There shouldn't be a path where they were walking, but they had followed one all afternoon. Marcus glanced toward the forest. The trail they had used still stretched between the trees. Clear, visible, real, and yet, it didn't exist on the map. Owen sat quietly near the edge of the clearing, watching the trees. The forest felt heavier now. Oppressive, like the air itself had thickened. He could hear the others talking behind him. Setting up tents. Lighting a small camp stove. Normal camping sounds. But something else was there too. A faint vibration in the ground. So subtle it might have been imagination. He pressed his palm to the soil. Still. Silent. Nothing. He pulled his hand away. Maybe he was just tired. Night fell slowly. The hikers gathered around a small lantern. The forest beyond their campsite had become a wall of darkness. Marcus forced optimism. Tomorrow morning, we head east until we hit the ridge. Tyler nodded. Easy. Jess stretched. Worst case scenario, we're a few miles off. Alina remained quiet, staring into the forest. Marcus noticed. What's wrong? She hesitated, then whispered something almost too quiet to hear. The trail shouldn't exist. Marcus looked at her. She continued. The map says this area has no trails at all. A long silence followed. Tyler tried to laugh. Well, good thing we found one. No one laughed. The wind stopped. Completely. And suddenly the forest felt different. The quiet deepened. Thicker. Heavier. Owen noticed it first. He slowly turned toward the trees. The silence had changed. Not peaceful. Not natural. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. He whispered the same words again. Guys. Marcus looked up. What? Owen stared into the darkness beyond the clearing. Now it's quiet. No birds. No wind. No insects. Nothing. The forest had gone completely silent. And far below their campsite, deep beneath miles of tangled roots, something ancient shifted slowly in its sleep. Chapter 3. The animals were already gone. The silence didn't happen all at once. At first, none of them were sure it had even begun. After all, forests grew quiet at night. Animals slept. Birds settled into their nests. Wind faded as the temperature dropped. It was normal. That's what Marcus told himself. But this silence wasn't normal. It wasn't peaceful. It felt deliberate. Like the forest had chosen to stop making noise. The hikers sat around their small lantern in the center of the clearing. The dim yellow light cast long shadows across the ground, stretching the shapes of trees into tall, twisted silhouettes. Beyond the circle of light, the forest had become a wall of blackness. Jess broke the silence first. Okay, I hate this. Tyler raised an eyebrow. Hate what? She gestured toward the trees. Listen. Everyone did. Nothing. Not a single chirp. No crickets. No owls. No rustling animals moving through leaves. Just silence. Marcus cleared his throat. It's probably just late. But even as he said it, he knew something was wrong. Owen stared into the forest. Even at night, you should hear something. Elena nodded slowly. He's right. Tyler tried to shrug it off. Maybe a storm's coming. Marcus glanced upward through the canopy. The sky was perfectly clear. Stars glittered faintly between the branches. No clouds. No wind. And still, no sound. The lantern flickered softly. Jess wrapped her arms around herself. I don't like how dark it is out there. Tyler smirked. It's called night. But his voice carried less confidence now. Marcus stood up. I'm grabbing more firewood. Owen looked at him immediately. I'll come. Marcus nodded. Good idea. The two men grabbed flashlights and stepped beyond the lantern's glow. Instantly, the darkness swallowed them. The forest felt colder away from the camp. The ground was soft beneath their boots, thick with layers of fallen leaves and moss. Marcus swept his flashlight across the trees. Ancient trunks towered around them like pillars holding up the sky. See, Marcus said quietly. Nothing to worry about. Owen didn't respond. He was listening. Not to something specific. Just listening. Waiting. Because the silence still felt wrong. They collected a small bundle of branches from a fallen tree. Marcus kicked at the ground, snapping twigs loose. Funny thing about silence, he said casually. What? People think quiet means safe. Owen glanced at him. But usually it means the opposite. Marcus chuckled. Relax. He lifted the bundle of wood. Let's head back. They turned toward the camp. The lantern light flickered faintly through the trees. A small golden glow in the darkness. They were only 30 yards away. But Owen suddenly stopped walking. Marcus noticed. What? Owen frowned. Did you hear that? Marcus listened. Nothing. What? I thought. Owen hesitated. Never mind. They continued walking. But Owen glanced over his shoulder once more. The forest behind them was completely still. And impossibly dark. Back at camp, Tyler had started a small fire beside the lantern. The flames crackled softly as Marcus dropped the branches beside it. Jess looked relieved when they returned. Finally, Elena looked up from the map she had been studying. Anything out there? Marcus shook his head. Just trees. Tyler tossed another stick into the flames. See, we're fine. Jess forced a smile. Yeah. But she kept glancing toward the forest. Something about the silence pressed against her nerves. Like standing in an empty house where you swear someone else is inside. Time passed slowly. The fire burned low. The lantern dimmed. One by one, the hikers crawled into their tents. Marcus took the first watch. A habit he had developed during previous expeditions. Someone always stayed awake during the first few hours of night. Just in case. He sat beside the fire, staring into the trees. The silence continued. Even the fire sounded loud. Each crackle echoed faintly through the clearing. He checked his watch. Midnight. The forest remained perfectly still. Marcus yawned. Maybe the old man at the gas station had gotten into his head. Stories had a way of doing that. Make a normal forest feel like something sinister. But that's all it was. Stories. Then Marcus noticed something strange. He leaned forward slowly. The firelight flickered across the ground, illuminating the dirt around the campsite. And there, he saw movement, very slight. Marcus frowned. He stared closer. The soil beneath the leaves shifted almost imperceptibly. Up, then down. He blinked. The movement stopped. Marcus rubbed his eyes. Probably fatigue. His mind playing tricks. He exhaled slowly. Get a grip. The ground remained still. Completely still. Marcus shook his head and leaned back against his pack. The silence stretched on. Inside her tent, Jess couldn't sleep. She rolled onto her side, listening. Still no insects. No wind. The quiet pressed against her ears like pressure underwater. She checked her phone. No signal. No service. Just the faint glow of the screen lighting the tent. Jess sighed and turned the phone off. Then she heard something. Not loud. Not clear. Just a faint sound beneath the ground. Like distant shifting soil. She sat up, listening carefully. The sound stopped. Jess frowned. Probably Marcus moving around outside. She lay back down. But sleep still refused to come. Owen sat awake in his tent as well. He hadn't planned to. But something in the forest kept him alert. A feeling. Like waiting for thunder after seeing lightning. He quietly unzipped the tent and stepped outside. Marcus glanced over. Can't sleep. Owen shook his head. Too quiet. Marcus smiled faintly. You'll get used to it. Owen sat beside the fire. The two men stared into the forest. Minutes passed. Neither spoke. Then Owen whispered something that made Marcus uneasy. Where are the animals? Marcus frowned. What do you mean? Owen gestured around them. 3 million acres of forest. Marcus nodded. And we haven't seen a single animal since we got here. Marcus thought about it. Tyler had spotted tracks earlier. But actual animals. He tried to remember. A deer. A rabbit. Even a bird. Nothing. Marcus forced a shrug. They're around. But Owen slowly shook his head. No. He stared into the darkness beyond the trees. I think they left. Marcus chuckled softly. Left. Yeah. Owen's voice dropped lower. Like they knew something we didn't. Marcus opened his mouth to reply. But then something changed. The fire flickered. A faint vibration rolled through the ground. Both men felt it. Subtle. Barely noticeable. But real. They looked down at the soil beneath their boots. Marcus frowned. Did you feel that? Owen nodded slowly. The vibration faded. The ground became still again. Marcus forced a laugh. Probably distant thunder. But Owen didn't look convinced. He pressed his palm against the soil. The earth felt warm. Strangely warm. And for just a second, he could swear he felt something beneath it. A slow movement. A faint rise and fall. Like a sleeping chest taking a breath. Owen pulled his hand away. Marcus noticed. What? Owen stared at the ground. Then whispered something that made Marcus's stomach tighten. I think. He hesitated. Then finished the sentence. The forest is breathing. Marcus laughed. But it sounded hollow in the silent woods. Because somewhere deep below them, the soil shifted again. And this time, it moved a little more. Chapter 4, the ground started moving. Marcus told himself the vibration meant nothing. The earth moved sometimes. Small tremors happened everywhere, subtle shifts deep in the crust that barely reached the surface. It wasn't unusual. At least, that's what he repeated in his head while staring at the ground beside the dying campfire. But the feeling he and Owen had experienced hadn't been a quick tremor. It had been slow, rhythmic, like something far beneath them had shifted in its sleep. The fire burned low as the night stretched on. Owen eventually returned to his tent, though sleep never truly came. Marcus stayed awake another hour, watching the trees and occasionally glancing down at the soil. Nothing moved again. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with him. He crawled into his tent and zipped it shut. For a while the forest remained perfectly still. The silence continued. Then, sometime after 3 in the morning, the ground began to move again. Elena was the first to feel it. At first she thought she was dreaming. Her sleeping bag shifted slightly beneath her, just enough to wake her. She frowned and adjusted her position. But the movement happened again. A slow lift, then a gentle drop. Her eyes opened in the darkness. For a moment she lay still, listening. The forest outside remained silent. Then the ground beneath her rose again. Very slightly, like a slow inhale. Elena sat upright. What the hell? She pressed her palm against the floor of the tent. The soil felt warm and soft, too soft, like damp earth resting on something alive. Across the clearing, Jess stirred in her sleep. Her dreams twisted with strange sensations. She imagined waves rolling beneath her body, a boat drifting on dark water. Except she wasn't on water. She was on solid ground. Her eyes snapped open. The tent fabric above her swayed gently. Jess sat up slowly. Tyler. Her voice was quiet. The tent beside hers remained silent. She listened carefully. And then she felt it. The ground beneath her sleeping bag lifted. Just a little. Then settled again. Jess froze. Her heart began to pound. Okay, she whispered to herself. That's not normal. Owen felt it too. But unlike the others, he had been waiting for it. He had barely slept all night. That strange warmth in the soil had stayed in his mind. The moment the ground shifted beneath him, his eyes opened instantly. He didn't move. He simply listened. The earth lifted, then fell. A slow rhythm. Breathing. Owen slowly reached out and touched the ground again. The movement continued. Faint, but unmistakable. He whispered into the darkness. Oh my God. Marcus woke moments later. This time the movement was stronger. Not violent. Just undeniable. His tent fabric trembled slightly. He rolled onto his side. Then he felt it. The ground lifted. Marcus shot upright. Everyone up. His voice cut through the silent forest. Zippers ripped open as the others scrambled from their tents. Jess stumbled out first. Did you feel? The ground rose again beneath their feet. The entire clearing shifted upward slightly. Then lowered. Tyler stared down at the soil. What the hell was that? Elena whispered the answer before anyone else could. It's happening again. Marcus looked at her. What do you mean again? She hesitated. I felt it earlier, before you woke us. Another slow movement rolled through the clearing. The earth lifted, then fell. Owen stepped backward slowly, his eyes wide. It's not an earthquake. Marcus turned toward him. Then what? Owen pointed at the ground. It's too slow. They all felt the next movement. Longer this time. Like the earth was stretching. Jess shook her head. No, that's impossible. Tyler forced a laugh. Yeah, definitely impossible. but nobody sounded convinced anymore. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and swept the beam across the clearing. The soil looked normal. Leaves, roots, loose dirt. Nothing unusual. Yet the ground beneath them continued its slow rise and fall. Tyler crouched and pressed both hands against the soil. Maybe underground water. Alina shook her head. There are no rivers here. Marcus turned toward Owen. You said you felt something earlier. Owen nodded slowly. It felt like this. Jess stared at him. You didn't tell us. I thought I imagined it. The ground lifted again. Jess stumbled slightly. Okay, that's definitely real. Marcus forced calm into his voice. All right, everyone relax. But even he could hear the strain in his words. This could be geothermal activity. Tyler frowned. In a forest. Marcus hesitated. Maybe. The forest remained perfectly silent around them. No wind. No animals. Just the faint sound of shifting soil beneath their boots. Then Alina noticed something else. Marcus. He turned. She pointed toward the edge of the clearing. Look. The beam of Marcus's flashlight followed her finger. At first he didn't see anything unusual. Just roots pushing up through the dirt near a large oak tree. Then the root moved. Very slowly. Like a muscle tightening beneath skin. Marcus stepped closer. The root shifted again. Not breaking the soil. Just moving beneath it. Jess whispered from behind him. Roots don't move. Owen's voice came quietly. Unless they're attached to something alive. No one laughed. The ground suddenly trembled harder. Not violently, but stronger than before. The soil lifted higher this time. A slow, heavy movement. Then dropped again. Tyler stepped backward. Okay, I officially hate this place. Marcus looked around the clearing. The trees loomed above them like silent giants. Watching. Waiting. Alina whispered something that chilled everyone. Have you noticed something? Marcus glanced at her. What? She gestured toward the forest. The trees. Marcus frowned. They're closer. Jess shook her head. That's impossible. But when they looked around the clearing, the trees did seem closer. The circle of open ground had shrunk slightly. Roots twisted through the soil like enormous veins. And several of them were shifting slowly beneath the surface. Marcus felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Everyone back away from the trees. They stepped toward the center of the clearing. The ground moved again. Rising. Falling. Breathing. Tyler tried to laugh again. But it came out thin and nervous. All right, someone explain this. No one could. The forest remained silent. Oppressively silent. Like the entire wilderness was waiting. Owen stared at the soil beneath his boots. His voice was barely more than a whisper. It's getting stronger. Marcus nodded slowly. He felt it too. The rhythm beneath the earth had changed. The breaths were deeper now. Slower. He looked toward the dark forest surrounding them. And for the first time since entering Black Hollow, Marcus felt real fear. Because if the ground beneath them was breathing, then they weren't standing on soil. They were standing on something alive. And far below them, beneath miles of tangled roots, something enormous had just begun to wake up. Chapter 5. The trees began to shift. Morning should have brought relief. Sunlight usually chased away the strange fears that gathered during the night. The dark corners of the mind tended to shrink once daylight touched the world. But in Black Hollow, morning changed nothing. If anything, the forest looked worse in the light. Marcus was the first to step away from the campsite once the gray dawn filtered through the trees. The fire had burned down to cold ash, and the clearing looked exactly as it had the night before. Almost exactly. He scanned the surrounding trees carefully. Something felt different. Not dramatically. Just slightly wrong. The trees seemed closer. "Anyone sleep at all?" Marcus asked. The others emerged slowly from their tents. Jess rubbed her eyes. "Barely." Tyler stretched his arms stiffly. "That ground thing, we're all agreeing that actually happened, right?" Elena nodded. "We all felt it." Owen said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the forest. Marcus forced a practical tone. "All right, whatever that was, we're leaving." Tyler laughed quietly. "Best idea you've had all weekend." Marcus pulled out the compass again. The needle trembled slightly before settling. "North. Same direction as yesterday." "Trails this way," Marcus said. He gestured into the forest. They packed quickly. No one joked anymore. No one lingered. Within 20 minutes, the campsite was gone. The only evidence they had been there at all were a few footprints pressed into the damp soil. Footprints that slowly began to sink deeper into the ground. The trail looked the same as it had yesterday. Narrow, winding, carved between ancient trunks that blocked much of the morning light. But something had changed. Jess noticed it first. "Marcus." He turned. "What?" She pointed behind them. The clearing where they had camped was gone. Completely. The trees stood tightly packed where their tents had been only minutes earlier. Tyler frowned. "That's not possible." Marcus walked back a few steps. The spot where they had slept should have been obvious. But there was nothing there. No fire pit. No flattened grass. No open space at all. Just trees. Elena whispered quietly. The forest closed. No one responded. They continued walking. The forest floor twisted, with massive roots pushing up through the dirt like frozen waves. The trees towered above them, their bark dark and deeply grooved. Many of them looked impossibly old. Hundreds of years, maybe more. Owen ran his fingers along one of the trunks as they passed. The bark felt warm. He stopped walking. "Marcus." Marcus turned. "What now?" Owen pressed his palm against the tree. "Feel this." Marcus frowned but placed his hand against the bark. It was warm. Not sun-warmed. The sunlight barely reached the forest floor. This warmth came from inside the tree itself. Tyler walked over. "Maybe it's just the temperature." Owen shook his head slowly. "No." He moved his hand along the trunk. The warmth pulsed faintly. Marcus felt it too. A subtle vibration inside the wood. Like a slow heartbeat. Marcus pulled his hand away. "All right, let's keep moving." Another hour passed. But something strange began happening. The trail started bending. Not naturally. Not the gentle curves most hiking paths followed. These bends were sharper. More deliberate. Almost like the path itself was guiding them somewhere. Elena noticed it while studying the map. "This isn't the same route." Marcus looked over her shoulder. "What do you mean?" She pointed at the map. "We should be heading east now." Marcus checked the compass. The needle pointed north. Still, but the trail curved sharply west. "That's impossible." Tyler looked between the compass and the path. "So which one's right?" Marcus hesitated. "Compass." But when they followed it, the forest thickened instantly. Massive roots tangled across the ground like barricades. The trail was the only clear path through the trees. Jess sighed nervously. I don't think the forest wants us going that way. They followed the trail again. None of them liked the decision, but it was the only direction they could move. As they walked, the forest grew denser. Branches leaned inward. The path narrowed, and the trees began to shift. At first it was subtle. A branch that hadn't been there before. A trunk leaning slightly into the trail. Marcus assumed they simply hadn't noticed these details earlier. Until Tyler stopped walking. Guys. Marcus turned. Tyler pointed ahead. That tree wasn't there. 20 yards ahead, a massive oak now stood directly in the middle of the trail. Marcus frowned. That's impossible. We walked through here yesterday, Tyler said. That tree would have been impossible to miss. Elena looked behind them. Another tree now leaned across the path they had just used, blocking it completely. Jess whispered, "The forest is moving." Marcus forced logic into his voice. Trees don't move. But the evidence was standing directly in front of them. Owen stepped closer to the oak. The massive trunk stretched 30 feet high before disappearing into the canopy. He crouched near its roots. The soil around them shifted slightly. The roots twisted slowly beneath the dirt. Not growing. Moving. Jess backed away. Nope, I hate this. Tyler stared at the ground. That's not normal. Marcus grabbed Owen's shoulder. Don't touch it. Owen stood slowly, but his eyes remained fixed on the roots. They're alive. Marcus shook his head. Everything alive moves somehow. But even he didn't believe that explanation anymore. The forest groaned softly. Not loud. Just a deep, distant creaking sound. Like enormous wooden beams bending under pressure. Everyone froze. The sound came from deep within the forest. Something heavy shifted underground. The soil trembled faintly beneath their feet. Jess grabbed Tyler's arm. What was that? Tyler didn't answer. Marcus scanned the forest nervously. The trees swayed slightly. But there was no wind. Owen whispered the thought none of them wanted to say aloud. It's waking up. Marcus snapped. Stop saying that. But Owen continued staring at the ground. The faint vibrations were returning. Stronger now. Deeper. And the trees were leaning inward, slowly forming a narrowing tunnel around the trail. Jess's voice trembled. Marcus. He looked at her. What? She pointed ahead. The trail continued into the forest. But something about it had changed. The path sloped downward now. Steeper. Darker. Like a throat opening into the earth. And as they stared down that descending trail, the ground beneath them rose slowly. Then fell again. A deeper breath this time. Longer. Stronger. Owen whispered. It's getting bigger. Marcus didn't ask what he meant. Because for the first time, he could feel it too. The forest wasn't just breathing anymore. It was stretching. Chapter 6. Something beneath the roots is waking up. The trail sloped downward for nearly half an hour. At first the descent was gradual, the kind hikers barely notice while walking. But soon the ground tilted more sharply, forcing the group to step carefully between exposed roots and slick moss-covered stones. The deeper they went, the darker the forest became. Sunlight faded into thin gray strands, filtering through layers of branches above. It felt less like walking through woods and more like descending into something. Like they were being swallowed. No one said that out loud. But everyone felt it. Marcus stopped and checked the compass again. The needle spun. Slowly. Then faster. Finally it froze, pointing in a direction none of them were facing. Marcus tapped the glass. The needle spun again. Tyler groaned. Great, now even the compass is broken. Marcus shoved it back into his pocket. Magnetic interference. Jess looked around the forest. From what? Marcus didn't answer. Because he didn't know. The ground beneath them shifted again. A slow tremor rolled through the forest floor. This time the movement was stronger. The soil lifted beneath their boots like the surface of a wave. Then sank again. Jess stumbled slightly. Tyler grabbed her arm. Easy. Marcus steadied himself against a tree. The bark vibrated faintly beneath his palm. He pulled his hand away. Everywhere they looked, the roots twisted through the soil. Some as thick as tree trunks. Others thin and tangled like veins. And all of them seemed to move just slightly beneath the earth. Elena whispered, "Do you see it?" Marcus frowned. "See what?" She pointed toward the ground. "Watch the roots." They did. For a moment, nothing happened. Then one of the roots shifted. Very slowly. Not growing. Not cracking the soil. Just sliding slightly beneath it. Jess backed away. Roots don't move like that. Owen shook his head quietly. No, they don't. The forest around them groaned again. A deep wooden creak that echoed faintly through the trees. It sounded almost like distant thunder. But the sky above the canopy remained perfectly clear. Tyler rubbed the back of his neck. "I swear that sound is coming from underground." Marcus exhaled slowly. "That's impossible." But as he said the words, the ground trembled again. A stronger pulse. Like a heavy heartbeat beneath the forest. The soil lifted. Then fell. The breath was deeper now. Longer. Owen spoke quietly. "It's waking up faster." Marcus shot him an irritated look. "Stop saying that." But no one laughed this time. The trail continued downward until the forest suddenly opened into a strange hollow. It wasn't a clearing. Not exactly. More like a depression in the earth, where the trees had grown outward in a wide circle. The ground inside the hollow looked different. Dark. Soft. Almost black. Marcus stepped carefully into the center. His boot sank slightly into the soil. Tyler frowned. "That dirt looks wrong." Elena crouched beside Marcus. She pushed aside a layer of leaves. The soil beneath was tangled with thick roots. Hundreds of them. All intertwined like cables running beneath the forest. Jess whispered, "That's a lot of roots." Owen stared at them. "They're connected." Marcus frowned. "Of course they're connected. That's how forests work." But Owen shook his head slowly. "No, I mean really connected." He knelt beside the others. His hand hovered above the tangled mass. "Watch." The roots moved. Not quickly. Not violently. But unmistakably. A slow pulsing motion traveled through them. Like blood moving through veins. Jess's voice trembled. "Oh my God." Marcus leaned closer. He saw it too. The roots were expanding and contracting in rhythm. Pushing against the soil. Pulling back. Like lungs drawing breath. The ground beneath them shifted again. This time the movement nearly knocked Tyler off balance. "Okay, that's not normal." Marcus stepped back from the roots. The pulsing beneath the soil was growing stronger. The entire hollow seemed to breathe slowly. Up. Then down. Up again. Owen stared at the tangled roots, his voice barely audible. These aren't just roots. Elena looked at him. Then what are they? Owen swallowed. Veins. No one spoke for several seconds. The forest creaked around them. Another slow tremor rolled beneath the earth. Jess whispered, "Veins for what?" Owen didn't answer, because he already knew. And the answer terrified him. Marcus stood abruptly. "We're leaving now." No one argued. They quickly began climbing out of the hollow. But something strange happened as they reached the edge. The trees had shifted again. The trail they had followed down the slope was gone. In its place stood a wall of massive trunks and tangled branches. Marcus stared in disbelief. "That's not possible." Tyler pointed in another direction. "What about that way?" Marcus shook his head. That wasn't there before either. The forest had rearranged itself again. Paths closed. New ones opened. And every direction looked unfamiliar. Jess's breathing quickened. "We're lost." Marcus forced calm. "We'll find another route." But even he could hear the doubt in his voice. Another deep tremor rolled through the ground. Stronger than before. The soil lifted high enough this time that everyone felt it clearly. Like standing on the chest of a sleeping giant. Owen staggered slightly. His eyes widened. "It's getting bigger." Marcus turned sharply. "What does that mean?" Owen pointed at the hollow behind them. The tangled root mass was expanding, slowly pushing the soil upward. The roots twisted tighter, pulsing faster now. Marcus stared, and finally understood. The roots weren't just moving. They were feeding something. Something enormous beneath the forest. Something that stretched far beyond the hollow. Miles maybe. Elena whispered the realization aloud. The whole forest, her voice shook, is connected to it. Another tremor rolled beneath their feet. Deeper, stronger. The breaths were coming faster now. Jess stared at the shifting ground. Her voice barely more than a whisper. What if the trees aren't the forest? Marcus looked down at the soil. At the pulsing roots. At the rising earth beneath them. And for the first time, he understood the truth. The trees weren't the forest. They were just the hair growing from the skin of something much larger. Something alive. Something ancient. And beneath their feet, that thing was finally waking up. Chapter 7. The forest doesn't want them to leave. For the first time since the hike began, Marcus admitted the truth, if only to himself. They were lost. Not the ordinary kind of lost hikers eventually laugh about later. Not the kind solved with a compass, patience, and daylight. This was something different. The forest had changed around them. The trails were gone. And the ground beneath their feet was breathing. Marcus looked around at the others. Jess's face had gone pale. Tyler tried to hide his fear behind nervous jokes that no one laughed at anymore. Elena studied the map as if sheer determination might force it to make sense. And Owen. Owen stared at the ground like he was listening to something. Something deep beneath the soil. "Okay," Marcus said, forcing calm into his voice. "We pick a direction and keep moving until we hit the edge of the forest." Tyler nodded immediately. "Good plan." Jess glanced around nervously. "And if the forest moves again?" Marcus didn't answer that. He simply pointed east. "We go that way." No trail. No markers. Just dense woods. But it was better than standing still. The trees grew closer together almost immediately. Branches tangled overhead like grasping fingers. Massive roots twisted across the ground, forcing them to step carefully. The deeper they walked, the more the forest seemed to tighten around them. The air grew heavier, darker. Marcus pushed forward through a wall of hanging vines. "Keep up." Behind him, Jess struggled to squeeze between two thick trunks. These trees weren't this close before. Tyler forced a laugh. Maybe they grow fast. No one found that funny. The ground shifted again. A slow rising wave rolled beneath the forest floor. Jess grabbed a nearby tree to steady herself. "That's getting stronger." Marcus nodded grimly. "I know." Owen crouched and pressed his hand into the soil. The earth trembled faintly beneath his fingers. He could feel the rhythm clearly now. Breathing. Slow. Heavy. Alive. He pulled his hand away. "It's waking up faster." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. "Please stop saying that." An hour passed. Then another. The forest remained endless. Every direction looked the same. Ancient trunks. Endless roots. A canopy so thick the sky barely existed anymore. Tyler finally stopped walking. "Marcus." Marcus turned. "What?" Tyler pointed ahead. Marcus's stomach dropped. They were standing in the same hollow again. The same depression in the ground. The same tangled mass of roots pooling beneath the soil. They had walked in a complete circle. Jess stared at the hollow. "No." Marcus shook his head slowly. "That's not possible." But there it was. Exactly where they had left it. The roots pulsed beneath the dark soil. Up. Down. Up again. Breathing. Elena unfolded the map again. Her hands trembled slightly. "This makes no sense." Marcus stared at the hollow. "We walked east." "Exactly." Elena pointed at the map. "If we walked east for 2 hours, we should be here." Her finger tapped a location miles away. "But we're still here." Tyler groaned. "You're telling me the forest moved us?" Owen spoke quietly. "Not us." Everyone looked at him. "What do you mean?" Jess asked. Owen gestured around them. "The forest." Marcus frowned. "What about it?" Owen's voice dropped. "It's guiding us." Silence fell over the group. Jess shook her head. "No." But deep down, she knew he might be right. Marcus refused to accept that idea. "Fine," he said, "then we go west." He turned and began walking. The others followed. This time the forest seemed even thicker. Branches scraped against their backpacks. Roots rose higher from the ground like barriers. It was almost like the forest was resisting them. Marcus pushed through a cluster of thick undergrowth. "Keep moving." Jess stumbled over a root. Tyler caught her arm. "You okay?" She nodded weakly, but her eyes were wide with fear. Then they saw it. Another clearing. Marcus pushed through the last line of trees. His heart sank. They had returned to the campsite. The exact place where they had slept the night before. Except the clearing was gone. Trees filled the space where their tents had been. Massive trunks stood where the fire had burned. Jess turned slowly in disbelief. "No, no way." Tyler shook his head. "That's impossible." Marcus stared at the ground. Their old footprints remained faintly visible in the soil. But the forest had grown through them, like it had erased their presence overnight. The ground shifted again. A stronger pulse rolled through the soil. Everyone felt it. Jess grabbed Tyler's arm. "That was bigger." Owen nodded. "It's almost awake." Marcus snapped. "Enough." But even he could feel it now. The rhythm beneath the forest was accelerating, each breath stronger than the last. The soil lifted higher, dropped heavier. The entire forest floor was moving. Then something else happened. A deep sound echoed through the woods. Not a creak, not thunder, something deeper. A massive groaning vibration that seemed to travel through the ground itself. The trees trembled slightly. Loose dirt fell from the roots. Jess covered her ears. What was that? Tyler looked around wildly. That sounded huge. Marcus stared into the forest. The sound had come from somewhere far beneath them. Something enormous shifting in the darkness below. Owen whispered the truth. It's stretching. Marcus looked down at the soil. The breathing had changed again. The breaths were longer now. Stronger. Like something enormous drawing in air after a very long sleep. Elena's voice shook. What if it's the whole forest? Marcus turned slowly. What do you mean? She gestured at the trees. At the roots. At the ground. What if the entire forest is part of it? Tyler stared at her. You're saying the forest itself is alive? No one laughed. Because the soil beneath them rose again. Higher than before. Then fell. And far below their feet. Something ancient turned slowly beneath miles of roots. Marcus stared at the moving earth. His voice barely above a whisper. It doesn't want us to leave. And somewhere deep under Black Hollow, something enormous was beginning to wake completely. Chapter 8. The first one disappears. By the time the sun should have been high overhead, the forest had grown darker. Not the normal shade of thick woods. Something heavier. The kind of darkness that seemed to soak into the air itself. Marcus checked his watch again. 11:43 a.m. Yet the forest looked like late evening. Jess noticed it too. Why is it getting darker? Marcus looked up. The canopy above them had thickened somehow. Branches overlapped in dense layers, blocking most of the sunlight. But the strange part was, he didn't remember the trees being this dense before. Tyler ran a hand through his hair. This place is messing with my head. Owen stood quietly beside a tree, listening again. The ground beneath them pulsed steadily. Not subtle anymore. The rise and fall of the soil was obvious now. Slow. Massive. Like standing on the back of a sleeping animal. Except that animal was waking up. Marcus forced his voice steady. We keep moving. Jess looked around nervously. In which direction? Marcus hesitated. There was no good answer. Every direction looked identical. But standing still felt worse. Anywhere but here. They began walking again. Deeper. Always deeper. The forest had changed. The trees no longer grew straight. Many of them leaned inward at strange angles. Some twisted as they rose, their trunks spiraling like enormous muscles froze in mid-motion. Roots bulged from the ground in thick waves. The soil between them looked darker now. Almost black. Jess stepped carefully between two enormous roots. This place feels wrong. Tyler nodded. Like we're walking inside something. No one argued. Because that thought had crossed all of their minds. Then the ground lurched. Not a gentle rise this time. A sudden shift. Jess fell to one knee. Tyler grabbed a tree to steady himself. Marcus stumbled forward. What the hell was that? The soil beneath them sank slightly. Then rose again. A stronger breath. Owen crouched quickly, pressing his hand against the earth. His eyes widened. It's faster. Marcus frowned. What is? The breathing. Another deep tremor rolled through the forest. The ground lifted, then dropped harder than before. Jess's voice trembled. That's getting worse. Marcus nodded. I know. They reached another clearing. But this one felt different. The ground here was soft and uneven. Large cracks split the soil like scars. Some of them stretched several feet across. Elena crouched beside one of the cracks. What made these? Tyler leaned over her shoulder. Earthquake maybe. But as they stared into the crack, something inside it moved. Not an animal. Something larger. A thick root slowly twisted beneath the exposed soil. Jess jumped back. Did you see that? Marcus nodded. The roots beneath the ground were shifting constantly now, like a giant web tightening. Then it happened. Tyler stepped forward to examine another crack. Look at this. The ground collapsed beneath him. The soil suddenly sank inward with a heavy sucking sound. Tyler barely had time to scream. The earth swallowed his leg. Jess grabbed his arm instantly. Tyler. Marcus rushed forward. Don't move. Tyler struggled. My foot stuck. The ground around his leg continued sinking. Loose soil crumbled into the crack. And beneath it, something moved. A thick root slid slowly around Tyler's trapped leg. Jess saw it first. Her voice cracked with panic. Marcus. The root tightened. Tyler screamed. Oh God, something grabbing me. Marcus lunged forward and grabbed Tyler's shoulders. Pull. They pulled hard. The ground resisted, like Tyler's leg had been caught inside a tightening fist. Then the root moved again. Faster this time. It wrapped around Tyler's ankle. Jess screamed. It's pulling him. The soil collapsed further. Tyler dropped to his waist inside the crack. Help me. Marcus pulled harder. But the ground was winning. The root beneath Tyler's leg tightened again, dragging him deeper. Owen rushed forward. Wait. He grabbed Marcus's arm. Marcus shouted angrily. What are you doing? Owen stared at the crack, his face pale. It's not grabbing him. Marcus blinked. What? Owen pointed into the darkness beneath the soil. It's feeding. The root jerked suddenly. Tyler was dragged downward another foot. Jess screamed. No. Marcus pulled with all his strength. Tyler clawed desperately at the dirt. But the soil continued collapsing around him. The roots beneath him twisted tighter. Pulling. Dragging. Feeding. Tyler's scream echoed through the forest. Don't let it take me. Then the ground shifted again. A massive breath rolled through the forest floor. The crack widened suddenly. Marcus lost his grip. Tyler dropped. For one horrifying second, his fingers clawed at the edge of the soil. Then the earth closed over him. The crack sealed. The ground smoothed itself. And Tyler was gone. Silence fell over the forest. Jess collapsed to her knees. No, no. Marcus stared at the ground. His chest heaved with disbelief. That call. Elena backed away slowly. Her face drained of color. Did you see the roots? Owen nodded. They pulled him down. Jess looked at him with tears streaming down her face. You mean they killed him? Owen shook his head slowly, his voice barely audible. No. He pointed at the forest around them. At the trees. At the endless network of roots beneath the soil. They fed him to it. The ground shifted again. A deeper breath rolled through the forest. Jess flinched violently. Marcus looked down at the soil where Tyler had disappeared. The earth pulsed slowly. Up, then down. Stronger than before. Owen whispered something that made everyone freeze. It liked that. Marcus looked at him. What do you mean? Owen swallowed hard. The breathing. Another deep tremor rolled through the ground. The soil lifted higher, then dropped again. The breaths had grown deeper, stronger. Marcus felt cold dread creep through his chest. Because Owen was right. The breathing had changed. The thing beneath the forest had just been fed. And now, it was waking up faster. Chapter 9. The thing beneath the forest reveals itself. For a long time, no one moved. The forest stood silent around them, towering and ancient, its roots buried deep in the soil that had just swallowed Tyler whole. Jess remained on her knees beside the place where the ground had closed. Her hands dug helplessly into the dirt. Tyler, she whispered. But there was nothing beneath the surface now. No crack. No disturbance. Just soft earth and scattered leaves. Marcus stepped forward slowly. He knelt beside her and pulled her hands away from the soil. Jess, stop. Her voice broke. We have to dig him out. Marcus looked down at the ground. Even as they watched, the soil shifted slightly. A slow rise. Then fall. The forest breathed again. Marcus shook his head. He's gone. Jess stared at him in disbelief. You don't know that. But Owen did. He could feel it. The rhythm beneath the earth had changed again. Stronger. Satisfied. Another deep tremor rolled through the ground. This one nearly knocked Alina off her feet. Jess grabbed Marcus's arm. That was bigger. Marcus nodded. I know. The breaths beneath the soil were coming faster now. Heavier. Like something enormous pulling air into lungs that had been empty for centuries. The forest groaned. Not just one tree. All of them. A low wooden creaking echoed through the woods, like an enormous structure bending under pressure. Jess looked around in panic. What's happening? Owen stared at the ground. It's stretching. The soil bulged suddenly. Everyone jumped back. A thick root burst upward from the earth like a giant vein breaking the surface. It twisted slowly, pushing through the dirt. Another root rose nearby. Then another. Marcus stared in horror. The roots were enormous, each one thicker than a man's torso. They twisted upward like massive tendons. Jess backed away slowly. This isn't possible. But it was happening. All around them, the ground was opening. Roots pushed upward through the soil in slow, powerful motions. The forest floor cracked in long, jagged lines. And beneath those cracks, something moved. Something vast. Marcus grabbed Jess's arm. We need to run. But Alina was frozen. She stared down into one of the widening cracks in the earth. What is that? Marcus followed her gaze. And for the first time, he saw it. Far below the soil, beneath the tangled network of roots, something enormous shifted. Not an animal. Not a cave. Something organic. Something alive. A massive dark surface stretched through the earth like the back of a colossal creature, buried beneath miles of forest. The roots weren't just growing from it. They were attached to it. Feeding it. Connected to it. Owen whispered the truth. Oh God! Another massive tremor shook the forest. This one sent dirt raining down from the roots. Jess screamed. The ground beneath them rose dramatically. A slow, massive lift. Then dropped again. The breath was enormous now. The entire forest moved with it. Marcus stared at the rising earth. His voice trembled. That thing. He looked around at the endless trees. Is the forest? Elena shook her head slowly. No. She pointed toward the ground. The trees are just part of it. Owen finished the thought. They're growing from it. The forest groaned again. But this time the sound was deeper. Louder. A massive grinding vibration rolled beneath the earth. The cracks widened, and the thing beneath the soil moved again. A massive section of ground lifted higher than before. The roots stretched upward like enormous fingers. Jess stumbled backward. It's coming up. Marcus grabbed her arm. Run. But they couldn't. The ground around them had begun rising in slow waves. The forest floor bulged upward like muscles flexing beneath skin. Every step became unstable. Marcus pulled Jess toward a cluster of rocks. Over there. They stumbled across the shifting ground. Behind them, the cracks in the earth continued widening. Roots twisted violently now. The entire forest seemed to be moving. Elena glanced back one more time, and what she saw made her blood run cold. The soil in the center of the clearing had split open completely. Through the broken earth, a massive shape shifted slowly. It looked like dark flesh. Thick, ancient, covered in thousands of roots growing like hair. And it was moving. A slow rolling motion beneath the forest floor. Owen followed her gaze. His voice barely came out. That thing. Marcus shouted. Don't look, move. But Elena couldn't stop staring. Because the shape beneath the earth was enormous. Miles wide. A living mass buried beneath the entire forest. And every tree, every root, every inch of soil was part of it. The ground lifted again, higher than before. Jess screamed as the earth rose beneath her feet. Marcus dragged her forward. Keep moving. Behind them, the cracks in the forest widened further. The thing beneath the soil stretched. Massive root structures lifted into the air like limbs. The forest canopy trembled as the trees swayed violently. The breathing was thunderous now. Each inhale lifted the ground several inches. Each exhale dropped it again. Marcus realized something horrifying. It's not just waking up. Owen looked at him. Then what? Marcus stared at the rising forest floor behind them. The massive roots twisting upward. The ancient body shifting beneath the earth. It's standing up. A deep roar rolled through the forest. Not a roar of sound, but a vibration so powerful it shook the trees themselves. Jess clutched Marcus's arm. What does it want? Owen whispered the answer. Food. Marcus looked back at the moving forest one last time. The ground lifted again. Higher, stronger, and he realized something far worse. The creature beneath the forest wasn't fully awake yet. Not even close. And if Tyler had only been the first thing it ate, then the forest was going to need more. Much more. Chapter 10, The Forest Breathes Again. Marcus didn't remember how long they ran. Time inside Black Hollow had already begun to feel strange, stretched thin like shadows at sunset. Minutes blended into hours, and the forest looked the same no matter how far they pushed forward. But one thing was certain. They couldn't stop. Behind them, the forest continued to move. Not violently, not chaotically, but slowly, deliberately, like something enormous was shifting beneath the soil, adjusting itself after a very long sleep. The ground rose, then fell, each breath louder than before, each movement heavier. And somewhere behind them, something ancient was still waking up. Branches tore at their clothes as they ran. Roots clawed at their boots. Jess stumbled constantly, her legs trembling from exhaustion. Marcus kept pulling her forward. "Don't stop." Alina ran ahead of them, scanning desperately for any sign of the trail. But the forest had become a maze. Every direction looked the same. Endless trees, endless roots, and the earth beneath them continued its slow rise and fall. Owen ran last. He kept glancing behind them, listening. The forest wasn't chasing them. That was the worst part. It didn't need to. Another deep tremor rolled beneath the ground. Jess screamed as the soil lifted again. Marcus nearly lost his balance. "Keep moving." Elena suddenly stopped. Marcus almost ran into her. "What are you doing?" She pointed ahead. Through the trees. Light. Real sunlight. Marcus's heart jumped. "Go." They sprinted toward it. Branches slapped their faces as they forced their way through the dense woods. The light grew brighter. The forest floor sloped upward. And suddenly, they burst out of the trees. The highway stretched before them, a thin strip of pavement cutting through the wilderness. Marcus collapsed to his knees on the asphalt. Jess dropped beside him, sobbing with relief. Alina leaned against the guardrail, gasping for air. Owen stepped out last. He turned slowly and looked back at the forest. Black Hollow stood behind them exactly as it had before. Quiet, still, ancient. The trees swayed gently in a light breeze. Birds chirped faintly somewhere inside. The forest looked perfectly normal, as if nothing had happened at all. Jess wiped tears from her face. "We made it." Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah." But Owen didn't move. He kept staring at the trees, listening. Elena noticed. "What is it?" Owen frowned. "Do you hear that?" They listened. Birds. Wind. Normal forest sounds. Jess shook her head. "It's just the woods." Owen didn't look convinced. But after a moment, he turned away from the trees. Maybe it really was over. The old gas station sat a mile down the road. When they reached it, the same elderly man stood behind the counter. He looked up as the door opened. The bell chimed softly. For a long moment, he simply stared at them. Marcus stepped forward. "There were 5 of us." The old man nodded slowly. Marcus swallowed. "Now there are 4." The old man looked toward the forest outside the window. His voice was quiet. "Sometimes it takes more." Jess felt cold dread crawl through her chest. "You knew." The man sighed softly. "Everyone around here knows." Alina shook her head. "Then why didn't you stop us?" The old man looked at her with tired eyes. "Would you have listened?" No one answered. Because they all knew the truth. They wouldn't have. Authorities searched Black Hollow for 3 days. Rescue teams. Drones. Dogs. But they found nothing. No campsite. No cracked earth. No signs of massive roots tearing through the soil. And no sign of Tyler. The forest looked completely normal. Perfectly still. Exactly as it had for centuries. Eventually, the search ended. Tyler Hale was listed as missing. Presumed dead. Just another name added to a long list of people who had disappeared in Black Hollow National Forest. Months passed. Life slowly returned to normal for the survivors. Marcus tried to convince himself that what they experienced had some rational explanation. Elena buried herself in work. Jess refused to talk about the forest ever again. But Owen couldn't forget. Because every night, he heard it. At first he thought it was just nightmares, the mind replaying trauma. But the sound came even when he was awake. A deep, slow rhythm. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Breathing. Owen began researching the forest. Old newspaper archives. Missing persons reports. Stories from hikers. And one detail kept appearing again and again. The same warning. The same phrase. If the forest goes quiet, leave immediately. One night Owen sat alone on his porch. The sky was dark. The wind barely stirred. And far away, beyond the hills, Black Hollow Forest stretched across miles of wilderness. Owen listened carefully. For a long moment there was nothing. Then, very faintly, the sound returned. A slow inhale. Then a heavy exhale. Owen felt his stomach tighten. Because the sound was stronger now. Much stronger. Far away inside Black Hollow, the forest floor lifted slowly. Then sank again. Roots twisted beneath the soil like enormous veins. And deep beneath the earth, the ancient creature shifted. Awake now. Fully awake. Its massive body stretched beneath miles of forest, and the trees above it swayed gently with each breath. The forest had always been alive. People had simply never noticed. Until now. And somewhere deep inside Black Hollow, the ground cracked open again. A new trail appeared between the trees. Wide enough for hikers. Wide enough for explorers. Wide enough for anyone curious enough to wander deeper. Because the forest was breathing again. And it was hungry.
Closing chapter.
Forests have always frightened humanity, not because they are dark or vast or easy to get lost in, but because deep down, we know something older than us lives there. Long before cities, before roads, before civilization itself, there were forests stretching across the entire world. And maybe some of them were never just forests. Maybe the roots beneath the soil connect to something enormous, something ancient, something patient, something that sleeps beneath miles of trees, waiting for footsteps above it. So the next time you walk into the wilderness and everything suddenly goes quiet, no birds, no wind, no sound at all, ask yourself one question. Is the forest silent? Or is it holding its breath? And if you enjoyed tonight's story, make sure to subscribe, because the next horror story might be even darker. But until then, sleep carefully. The earth beneath you might be breathing.